Lemon.
In there. Oh, we're not the first one. Oh, is she off?
She's muted.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hello, how are you? Pardon us eating a little bit.
Uh-oh. I can't hear you. I hope that's... Oh, now I hear you. Okay, it was me.
Okay. We're just finishing up a little snack, so
Oh, that's so nice. Enjoy.
hopefully the teacher won't mind that the students are eating during class.
Not at all.
Hello.
My husband asked if you brought enough to share.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
He's a
There's one
teacher.
Come and get it.
There's one noodle left per person.
Wonderful.
There they go. And by the way, that's a bold talk from someone who did not share his scones with us.
Well, now I'm just hungry for noodles.
He's ashamed.
I am ashamed.
Hi, Jerry. Hi, Tamar. How are you?
Hi there. Hi. Is life getting complicated with Pesach coming on and all your usual duties still with you?
I don't know, not yet, but that probably means I'm just not focused on the right things. We're staying home again this year for, the second pandemic year. But we pod with my cousins. So we have like a little bit of family, a taste of our Seder, but not our normal. So in some ways it's a little bit easier. There's no traveling.
Right.
We usually come back for Chol Hamoed and last days, so we're sort of used to still koshering things. It's just the extra seders. I know I made the mistake of typing in my browser how many days till Pesach, and it said 16, which is really 15 because Shabbos is,
Right.
ready. That was nerve-wracking. How about you guys?
We're doing okay. It'll be just a two-person Seder. Sedarim, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's like not a bad year for it because you have to start so late after Shabbat, even the first Seder.
Yeah.
Hard to have a big one.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, well, we can get started. Next week, everyone will celebrate alongside me a very momentous occasion. It is the 25th anniversary of my bat mitzvah parsha next week. And so I'm very excited about next week. And then I realized there was still this week in between. But I also realized that we could give ourselves a big pat on the back because I remember the first week. Hello, Nelson. Well, you might not be able to hear me yet. Hello, Nelson. Welcome.
Hello.
I remembered 5 or 6 parshiot ago, where I think it was you, Tamar, who said, what are we going to talk about for the next 5 parshiot? All these details of the Mishkan, and it felt sort of maybe dry or inaccessible. And now here we are. We did it. We made it to the 5th week and the last week. Now, of course, we'll have a whole different nut to crack in Vayikra, but it's kind of hard to believe that Shemot is over. The Mishkan's details are concluding this week. And I was reading through the 2 parashiot, trying to figure out how to avoid the details yet again of the Mishkan building. And I found this really interesting pasuk. I think I've learned more parsha this year preparing for this parsha class, in my whole life. because, nothing quite forces you to pay attention to detail as knowing people are counting on you to learn something. And
Well, if you want to learn something, go teach it.
yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to share my screen to the right place. Let's see, this should work. Perfect. And so I found these two psukim sort of tucked in there that I really, I don't remember hearing them or listening to them, and probably because I zone out a lot during, how many feet high the whatever is going to be in the Mishkan. And I thought this was such an interesting pasuk to focus on. So first we learn that the building of the Mishkan is done, right? Kachol asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe, chen asu b'nei Yisrael et kol ha'avodah, right? So all the things that God had commanded Moshe to do, so all of b'nei Israel had done the work. And at that point, we expect it's like the ribbon cutting ceremony is sort of how I thought about it, right? Like we expect that the Mishkan is going to be open for business. And yet there's this pause. Vayar Moshe kol hamlacha v'hinei asu ota ka'asher tzivah Hashem chen asu v'yavarchem otam Moshe. And when Moshe saw that they had performed all the tasks as the Lord had commanded, so they had done, Moshe blessed them. And I thought, wow, that's such a nice thing, right? That there's this liminal moment where all of the work that they've been doing for 5.5 Parsha, right, however many months that took, is ready to say, God, welcome to your new home. And instead of just moving on, Moshe took a moment to honor and acknowledge that space, of completion. And just from that sort of liminality perspective, I thought, wow, that's really beautiful. And Rashi points out it is beautiful, and it's this very climactic moment, and yet we don't know what Moshe said, right? This is either these are private words between Moshe and Bnei Israel, or the Torah just didn't see fit to record them. But Rashi tries to help fill in the blanks a little bit. And so he explains, Vayavrech otam Moshe, Amar lahem yehi ratzon shetishresh Shechina b'maaseh yedechem. Right? May it be your will that the Shechina should rest in the work of your hands, which I happen to think is just a beautiful bracha to give anybody at any point. What a nice thing to wish for someone. V'hi noam Hashem Elokeinu aleinu v'chule. And so Rashi is imagining that Moshe is saying this pasuk, which I brought in its fullness below, from the one of the 11 Tehillim that starts Tfilah LaMoshe. Right, so these are prayers of Moshe as recorded in Tehillim, and so Rashi doesn't have to work too hard to imagine, the content, because here is a pasuk that we have in our tradition that Moshe actually spoke, and it says, "V'hi noam Hashem Elokeinu aleinu u'maaseh yadenu konana aleinu u'maaseh yadenu konanehu." We say this in davening on Shabbat morning, right? And again, it's this idea that the pleasantness of Hashem should be upon us and establish our work and prosper the work of our hands. And so I was thinking a little bit about just what it means to give a bracha, to receive a bracha, what it means to take that moment. I will admit that I had a test at school this week, and so my brain was not fully in the Parsha until sort of later in the week. And I was trying to do some Googling of what kind of brachot we get. And there are not too many people who give brachot in Breshit and Shmot. And a lot of commentaries note that a lot of them sort of mess up the brachot, right? All of the forefathers create a lot of tension in between their children when they give brachot, right? Abraham gives one to Yitzchak and not Esav. Yitzchak gives one to Yaakov that's different from his other children, right? There are all these sort of just Yishmael, gives one to Yitzchak, not Yishmael. Yitzchak gives one to Yaakov, not Esav. Yaakov prioritizes Yosef, right? And Yaakov's brachot to his children are very strange and filled with sort of backhanded observations about their true natures. And so that the idea that Moshe gives a bracha here that is complete, even if we don't know it in its fullness, is beautiful. And I was thinking, and I would love to hear people's thoughts just about, is this, it doesn't say that Hashem had told Moshe to do this. To me, this feels more of like spontaneous, of the leader feeling so proud of his flock. And when you complete a project, what does it mean to give a bracha to someone? I read a shiur that suggested, why didn't Moshe give this bracha at the beginning, right? To say, as we build the Mishkan, it should be that Hashem's Shekhinah rests in the work of our hands. And they pointed out that at the beginning of a project, people are always very excited, right? When you first start doing something, and when it's actually, years into a project, when you actually need the bracha to sort of remotivate you, right? Bnei Israel have done a lot of work, but maintaining this desire to have the Shekhinah inside, that's hard after they've been at it for so long, which again I thought was nice. And so at this moment, I was feeling like this was just like such a nice moment that I wanted to share the beauty of this piece. And then I learned a beautiful piece by the Ketav Sofer, which I think does a nice job of sort of pivoting this moment and making it even more special and beautiful. And the Ketav Sofer is Rabbi Avraham Shmuel Binyamin Sofer, who lived in the 1800s, a Hasidic Rebbe. And he notes something interesting, which I didn't think about when I was first learning this Rashi, right, where Rashi says, "Yehi ratzon shetishresh Shekhinah b'maaseh yedecha." May it be your will that the Shekhinah should rest in the work of your hands. And he notes that there's nothing unique here, right? Hashem has already told Bnei Israel that the Shekhinah will dwell in the Mishkan when the Mishkan is finished, right? So it's maybe more of like an observation than a bracha on some level. And that also this phrasing of Yehi Ratzon is usually a God framed bracha, right? Yehi Ratzon Hashem Elokeinu is usually what comes next. And so it's interesting that in this midrashic retelling or imagining that the Yehi Ratzon is really about Bnei Israel's will, not maybe necessarily about God's will. And so he says here, right, it seems fitting that the Yehi Ratzon is Ratzonam Shel Yisrael, right? She Yisrael Yirtzu Vishtokeku Lahashret Hashchina. I think that's just a beautiful way of thinking about it. Also, that the will of Israel, of Bnei Israel, and not God, that Israel should want and thirst for the dwelling of the Shekhinah. Right? This idea of like being thirsty for God, I think, is wonderful. And that after all of the works of the Mishkan had been done, Kasher Tziva Hashem, right, as God had commanded, there was a worry, a chashash, that there would be distasteful thoughts of pride and arrogance and of ecstasy. And I think that we've seen that before. And again, it's not such a modern idea to be worried about feelings of pride, right? Of course we should be proud. We did all this really good, hard work. And that this moment called for the concentration of the mind toward one end without distraction, toward the dwelling of the Shekhinah. Right? Because after all, this was a promise, make for me a sanctuary, for me, for my name, and I will dwell among you. And so the Ketav Sofer imagines that what the bracha is, right? Yehi ratzon haratzon shalachem, may it be your will, the will of Bnei Israel themselves, shetishra hashchina b'maaseh yedechem, that the Shekhinah should rest in the work of your hands. And so it's a subtle reshifting of the language of Rashi, and Rashi quoting the Midrash, right? That the intention is not of God to dwell in the people. It's not Moshe reminding Bnei Israel that God will dwell there. It's Moshe realizing that in these sort of big projects, we often lose sight of the goal for all of the details. Right. And so Bnei Israel has spent the last several months, maybe even years, right, measuring amot and half amot and cubic feet and lengths of cloth, and that sometimes when you do all of that, you forget that what you're really doing is you're building this house for God. And so the moment of bracha was not a moment to pause and be proud of their work and like recognize that the importance of that moment. It was Moshe maybe shifting, right? Calling their attention, saying, don't forget, right? This is a place that we were meant to invite God into. And so, with all of the detail, the letter of the law, maybe, right, is exactly when we need to, like Moshe is saying, we need to remember that our will is that the Shekhinah should rest here. That this was a moment not to lose God in pursuit of God, right? Not to lose God in all the details of that thing. And I think that at this moment, pre-Pesach, right, Tamar, you started by asking how I was doing. Not well, obviously, because that was my first thought was, wow, like Pesach is all about the details. And how often do we get to our Seder feeling exhausted and like we're ready to go take a nap or just go to sleep for the whole night, right? But we've made 1,000 courses and we've set the table with our best Pesach finery, and every detail is perfect, and we've sort of lost the moment to welcome God into that space because we're just so exhausted by then. And I'm sure that there are other good examples of that out there, where we spend so much time on the details that we forget about the goal. And so I think that this bracha of Moshe was not necessarily about restating the purpose of the Mishkan from God's perspective. It was about reminding Bnei Israel, now we've done all this work, we're at the Seder, right? We're sitting down to enjoy it. Let's remember the ultimate goal, and make sure that the Mishkan or our shuls or whatever, our places of community gathering remain focused on inviting God into them and not on praising the details, right? And maybe that's the way to understand the Katav Sofer, about worrying that there were going to be feelings of pride, right? It wasn't about who made which piece of the Mishkan. It's about making the Mishkan a place where God will want to dwell in the end. So I don't know. That was a short thought, I guess, but I welcome any of your thoughts on the ideas of brachot in general, or this idea of sort of mistaking the details for the finished picture.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily so different than when we make a bracha when we're going to eat something, right? You have the moment where it's like, oh, this is, the apple I pulled off the tree and this was all my work and look what a great job I did. And you're supposed to, I think, recall that, there's a wider world and there's a thanks to God that you need to have. And that's why they say your table is like an altar, that maybe that you should try and keep those things in mind. And just like you don't want this beautiful Mishkan to turn into something mundane, just the work of our hands, you don't want everyday things also to turn into just mundane things. And that's why there's all these hundreds of brachot that we can say to recall where everything comes from.
So this is like a Birkat Nanin. This is about like enjoying the Mishkan, but remembering that it is not just our own work, but that of God's.
Sure.
I like that. I think that's beautiful.
I like,
Right.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I like Dan's analogy of the table with the altar, extrapolating to the Mishkan with that's the same parallel.
Yeah. And how important is that pause, right? I think the bracha as like a moment to pause and reflect is such an interesting idea. Maybe not so novel, but right, thinking about my own table, like as my children are like puppies, sort of like jostling for elbow space at the table, and like the first bite and who gets the first serving. And when you say like, well, don't forget, we have to go wash and say motzi, there is like sort of a, well, wait a second, there's more to this meal than the food, so to speak. I think that's nice.
I mean, the whole idea of brachot is a little sometimes hard to understand,
Hmm.
right? Especially the concept of blessing God when God has everything. But I think if you say, God is blessed with these things, not I'm blessing you, that,
Hmm.
this is your stuff, God, it's yours, and I'm reaping the benefits.
Yael,
Yes.
I got stuck on on language. The phrase "Vahi Noam Hashem Elokeinu," may the pleasantness of the Almighty, and I was kind of stopped there in my tracks to speak of the pleasantness of God. Noam Hashem. I've never run into that kind of phrasing. I've heard of the justice of God, the love of God, the anger of God.
Mm-hmm.
The pleasantness of God. That seems odd. Is that very unusual, or is it just that I haven't run into it?
No, I pause to reflect on that word Noam also. We often talk about like Darchei Torah, right? In Eitz Chaim we sing about that is like a derech Noam. But that God is Noam, yeah. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. That's a good question. Certainly, I think that often it's like a softer side to God, right? It feels like Noam is like a softer word than the other words that you used. And maybe this is a moment, some of the things that I saw said like, who's Moshe to give a bracha, right? This is not a moment where like a man is giving a bracha to other men. This is all about God and his like greatness. And maybe Moshe saying like, how pleasant Hashem is for us is like a way to soften that moment and to say this Mishkan is something that we did as a people, like we can give each other a bracha on it. It almost made me think of like a Birkat Habayit, right? Some people have those hanging in their house, or like the Birkat HaEsek for businesses. This idea of us welcoming God into a space, like who are we to welcome him in, welcome God in? But if we think of God as a God of Noam, that's maybe a more accessible God, one that we feel comfortable, right? Who gives brachot to whom is certainly an issue of power. In my house, it comes up a lot right now because my children want to like get involved in the parental blessings. My 2-year-old likes to stick her hands on everyone's head and the other kids get upset. And so we've started having the kids give a bracha to each other at the end of the parental brachot. I thought like, what kind of bracha do you give to like when there's it feels like brachot are sort of top down. It makes sense for a parent to bless a child, but for children to bless each other is like kind of an unusual thing, right? And maybe that's kind of how Moshe and Bnei Israel are relating, and so to relate to God as Noam is less intimidating. I don't know. I'll have to search. Yeah.
I thought that why do we bless God? I think in a way is an element of gratitude. God blessed us with the bread, with the house, with everything. And there is even prayer. In the Amida, you say, may, how does it say when you ask for a good business, with the year of blessings. We want God to give blessings through profit, to success, to good business. So we are reciprocating by blessing God.
Nice. So you see it as a bracha of God. I think that I was thinking of it as a bracha to people to like remember that God was there. Right, that Yehi Ratzon, right, that it should be Bnei Israel's will that they welcome the Shekhinah in. But maybe it is a bracha, right, to God to say like, welcome to your new home.
Which you blessed us with the opportunity to do to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think blessings, when I did my chaplaincy unit, sometimes the patients would ask for some kind of blessing or prayer at the end. that was sort of like free form, which is not, I think, really the Orthodox way, right? And at the beginning, it made me very anxious until I realized that really it was like a moment to reinforce to the patient what you wanted them to remember from the conversation, right? So if a patient was worried about their children, right, you would say, God, please bless this patient's children as they wait for their parent to return home from the hospital, right? And it was a sort of like a way to talk to a person through God almost, to remind them of the things that mattered or that were important. And so blessing, I think, is a really interesting way of communication between people, right? Between Moshe, right? Moshe is saying, and so if we think about it as blessing God, that's also really interesting, is instead of, right, only having bakasha or shevach, right, like the more traditional ways of thinking about how we relate to God, only by honoring him or honoring God or by requesting things of God, to think of blessing God is what a powerful way of communicating with God. I like that.
I had one of the Kleenex moments in my life was when I saw my son blessing his daughter on the Shabbat table. That was like, oh my God, what did I accomplish here? That was like a mission accomplished kind of thing. L'adore in vivo.
Yeah, how beautiful. Yeah, I think blessings are very powerful.
The opposite of that is my cousin, who's a rabbi. He got a smicha from Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik here in Chicago. And he was going off to do a chaplaincy in the Air Force. And he went to Rabbi Soloveitchik and he said, he says, why are you here? He says, I'm here for a bracha. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says, that's ridiculous. It doesn't help if I give you a bracha. Goodbye and good luck.
That's so funny, because growing up in Boston, there was another Soloveitchik, and there's a very famous story that someone came to him as though they would come to like the Chabad Rebbe, right? And they said, Rebbe, like, I'm going into business. I hope that you'll give me a bracha. And the Rav is said to have said, what are you, an apple? Right. And so I think there is sort of this, and it is certainly a tradition that I grew up in, right? That like brachot they're not relational in that way. And I think that here having Moshe give a bracha in that sort of relational way is powerful, to say like, maybe people deserve brachot just as much as apples do, right? Yeah, I think it's an interesting relationship that I hadn't thought about really. Yeah, that's a great story. I like it. I'll have to add it to my Rav Soloveitchik or Rabbi's Soloveitchik brachot canon. Well, I know today was short. I hope that's good, not bad. Always good to have more time. Okay, good. A nice thought to lead you into Shabbat. And I'm excited to, I'm going to share the video again next week in honor of my bat mitzvah Parsha. And then something more lengthy, or, a little more lengthy in our own special space, not for your whole shul. Oh, and I meant to start by saying it was so amazing to see you, Debbie, in that video. I hope that, I don't know who was at the dinner. I'm sorry, I fell asleep while I was putting my daughter to sleep. This was like the thing I was going to say first. Yeshiva Chovevei Torah of Ari's school honored him, I'm sure you all know, at their dinner on Sunday night.
We saw it, yeah.
We, my husband and I go every year since he's also an alum. And so we were, of course, there. And it was so fun. I think I saw Tammy in one of the shots of the reel. And I was so excited, pointing everyone out to Will, like, oh, this person and that person. And Debbie, you spoke so beautifully. It was so nice.
Oh,
It was such a beautiful tribute, not only to Rav Ari, but the community of which he is a part.
Yeah, I think they did a nice job. They did a really good job.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that they very much captured the warmth of your community, and the community feel. Talk about brachot, right? Giving brachot to each other. I think that felt like a bracha to Rav Ari from your community, and also from him to you. And that was so nice. Okay, well, I'm done rambling now.
Thank you.
I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. I look forward to seeing you.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Thank you.
Shabbat
Yeah.
Shalom.